It's interesting to note that almost all these predictions are based on extreme and dangerous situations to attract attention and accentuate their positions. The media does the same thing. Fear sells, and that's what drives them as well, selling articles. Why is this happening? Follow the money.
This is Climate Debrief, brought to you by the CO2 Coalition. I'm Angela Wheeler. In a moment, we'll hear from CO2 Coalition member Graeme Phipps. With decades of hands-on experience as a professional geophysicist and geologist, Graeme Phipps has explored and operated in some of the planet's most challenging frontiers, from the frozen Beaufort Sea and Arctic islands to the Gulf of Mexico, the North Sea, Yemen, Kazakhstan, Russia, and beyond. Thank you for lending your expertise on Climate Debrief, Graeme.
It's good to be here.
In your presentation, you argue that global warming is part of natural 2,000-year cycles, like the medieval warm period or Little Ice Age. How convincing is the evidence from ice cores showing CO2 lagging behind temperature changes?
I think it's very convincing and definitive. The ice data clearly shows that temperatures rise before CO2 rises, as you can see on these graphs. How can something cause another event when it occurs after the fact? It's pretty obvious to me. For about 2.6 million years since these ice ages have been occurring, the Earth has emerged from an ice age glaciation period with roughly about the same patterns of a 5 to 6 degrees centigrade rise every about 100,000 years or so. The Vostok Antarctic ice record clearly shows this effect. Temperatures always rise several hundreds to 1,000 years before CO2, and therefore cannot be causing the temperature change. There's a simple experiment you can do to test this. If you pour a can of carbonated water into 2 glasses and then put one glass in the fridge and put the other one, just leave it in room temperature, come back a little bit later after the glasses and the water and the carbonated fluid has adapted, and then have a sip, you'll see that the warmer glass that's outside in the room is more carbonated and more bubbly than the one in the fridge. It's the same effect in the ocean.
With solar activity, ocean currents and volcanic eruptions highlighted as major drivers, what role do you see for human CO2 emissions?
Well, when you put it into the context of the entire geologic history, it's a very minimal impact. These levels of CO2 we're talking about are very small compared to what's been experienced over geologic time, where we've seen up to 10 times higher CO2 levels as life evolved over time. An example of this and the relationship between CO2 and temperatures is that about 245 million years ago, CO2 levels were about 600 parts per million. The temperature averaged about 25 degrees centigrade. Then, around 145 million years ago, CO2 levels were 4 times higher at about 2,500 parts per million, but the average temperature then was about a third lower at about 18 degrees centigrade. Historic evidence comparing CO2 levels with temperature levels clearly shows no correlation between these two items. And I guess the question we have is, why would we expect that to be the case now when throughout time that hasn't been the case?
You state in your presentation that atmospheric CO2 today is historically low at 415 parts per million, far below the 8,000 parts per million of the Cambrian explosion when life thrived. Do you agree that viewing CO2 more as a plant fertilizer could redefine our approach to agriculture and food security?
Absolutely agree. And I think this is a critical point, the impact on agriculture. CO2 is essential to plant life. And the more CO2, the higher the plant growth. An experiment that proves this fellow grew some trees under varying amounts of CO2 and found that by doubling the CO2 from what we have today, the growth of the tree was doubled as well. So in other words, plants grow much better and more robust under higher CO2s, and this has been proven. The narrative regarding CO2 definitely needs to change. CO2 being critical to plant life, and greenhouse farmers, for example, add CO2 into their greenhouses to enhance the growth of this. As people become more aware of the importance and positive impact of higher CO2 levels on plant growth, plus recognize that adding CO2 is not causing a climate crisis, I believe the position will change and they will welcome more atmospheric CO2 and the benefits associated with it.
Graeme, you cite 14 to 40% global greening since 1980 and crop yield boosts from higher CO2. How might this good news change public perceptions of climate change, especially in developing regions facing food shortages?
Well, I think it'll make a big impact. And the importance is to get this information out there and show it to them. Those slides that show the greening of the earth is pretty obvious. And what's happening there is that with higher CO2 levels, plants open up their spore space or close their spore space because they don't have to be as wide open to allow the CO2 to get in. The amount of CO2 is higher. That also means that they release less water out of their system. And therefore, in these areas that are more arid, they don't need as much water to grow. And we're seeing this on the global graph. More CO2 is also beneficial to more rapid plant growth and higher crop yields, and also the increase in farmable acreage and land. What this means is more food for humanity. It's pretty hard to argue against the benefit of that. Once this is understood and broadly shared, this good news story should directly change public perception of the benefits of added CO2, especially in regions facing food struggles. It is also shown, backed by solid science, that CO2 is not resulting in a mankind-caused climate crisis.
Data shows heat waves are less severe than in the 1930s, hurricanes unchanged over 250 years, and sea level rising at a steady 20 centimeters per century since the 1800s. Why do you think alarmist predictions keep missing the mark, and what real adaptations should we prioritize instead?
Well, first of all, I want to comment that I completely agree that there's no evidence that recent historic changes in the frequency of not just hurricanes, but pretty well all natural climate-related disasters have been changing with changing CO2. It's interesting to note that the heat wave index was greatest in the 1930s under a period of lower CO2 levels. I think we all remember the dirty 30s and the droughts in the North America. Plus, increased CO2 level associated with increased land is being dedicated to agriculture with higher yields per acre. So this is also very good news. Yet the media alarmist narrative continues to mislead the public. Follow the money, one wonders. Is that what's driving this? Now, regarding sea level changes, the misleading, fear-driven media story is also a common narrative, but records show differently. Actual historic records show there's been no change in a steady 20 centimeter per century, which is 0.2 per year, of sea level rise since the 1800s. This has not changed or been impacted by the post-1940 increase in CO2 levels. There is no evidence that increased CO2 is impacting the rate of sea level change. The glaciers continue to melt, and as they continue to do so, sea level will rise modestly and until we get another ice age. And then, of course, this process will reverse itself. Just the other comment I'd like to make is that the majority of the ice on land has already melted. And so the amount of increase in the future, as we look to the future, will be less. And you just look at where the ice of the glaciers, when it covered most of North America, and now it's just in the Arctic regions. The majority, as I mentioned, is already melted. Melting ice in water makes no impact. And here's a simple experiment you can do. Fill your glass with water and ice, and then watch what level the water's at, and then come back when all the ice is melted, and it's the same level. So we're only dealing with the ice on land to make an impact on sea level. It's interesting to note that almost all these predictions are based on extreme and dangerous situations to attract attention and accentuate their positions. The media does the same thing as fear sells, and that's what drives them as well, selling articles. Reporting the actual results does not support a climate crisis and wouldn't support alarmist positions, but it wouldn't also sell papers. So I mentioned that comment. Why is this happening? Follow the money. Let's look at some actual facts. For most of the last 10,000 years, temperatures were higher than today, and mankind has historically done much better under higher temperatures and the cold spells, the Roman time period, for example. Significantly more people die from cold than from warm temperatures. Plants grow better, and the earth is greening under higher CO2. Crop yields worldwide have increased dramatically. Other scare-related claims are also shown to be false. For example, polar bears population has been increasing since 1960 when they put in rules about killing polar bears. And coral reefs have been expanding, not declining, when you actually look at the data. Adoptions we should prioritize should be pragmatic, evidence-based, on actual data, and support the needs and trends dealing with the specific sites where there's a problem, and no panic and do these things globally. Site-specific adoption is really the best case when it's really needed, and look at the actual trends.
You say that net zero policies are called economic suicide, that could avoid just a fraction of 1 degree Fahrenheit of warming, but cause job losses and energy poverty for billions. What bold policy shifts would you propose to prioritize prosperity over unachievable targets?
Well, pragmatically, get our governments to stop spending on carbon neutral policies that make no difference. It's pretty clear. Move all these funds and the staff associated with it to areas that make a difference in health and education, etc. I'm pleased to see that the U.S. government has already done this, and we in Jersey are in the process of trying to do exactly the same thing. Take the money that they're dedicating to carbon neutral and put it into areas that desperately need more money and make an impact on the people in the area.
You reference over 60 scientists, such as our chairman, Dr. William Happer, our director, Dr. Patrick Moore, as well as many other CO2 Coalition members and other notable, credible, reasonable voices with evidence there is no climate crisis. Why do you think diverse expert voices like these get overshadowed in mainstream media?
First of all, I'd like to raise the point that science should never be based on consensus in any event. It should be based on actual, testable, reliable data. Just ask Columbus. He didn't have consensus when he sailed across the ocean and stumbled across North America. Second, alarmist predictions are often based on extreme and dangerous situations to accentuate their position. The media does the same thing as fear sells. Reporting the actual results and even contrary positions wouldn't support the alarmist position or sell papers and media attention. Bias apparently pays for the case. Plus, media would lose face and credibility if they have to reverse their position, and this would also cause them concerns.
In concluding our conversation, Graeme, what is one action listeners can take today to dig deeper and question the status quo on the climate crisis narrative?
First of all, start with some basic common sense thinking. Just stand back, and that's what got me working in this in the first place. Do you really believe that CO2, an essential element for plant life, and having historically been up to 10 times higher in the past, is causing a climate crisis today? And secondly, what climate crisis? When you look around and observe things going on, we don't see these kind of things happening every day. And when you look at the data, it doesn't support it. The second point is do your own research. Dig into, that's what I had to do. I saw these things, they caused me questions, so I started researching and reading books and papers and look at the facts and the data. And I encourage you to look at the CO2 Coalition papers. I've got a lot of material in my website that's available there that's science-based, fact-based, trends-based, and then you can draw your own conclusions. But having that in your background when you start talking to people is very important. And third, with those that disagree with you, and everybody's allowed to do that, encourage an open public debate, a science-based debate. Encourage them to bring their scientists, bring all their experts, don't just talk about it, bring them to the table, and let's have that debate. And we're in the process of trying to do that very thing in Jersey here.
Graeme, thank you for taking the time to lend your expertise on Climate Debrief.
Thank you for watching. The Climate Debrief podcast is funded by listeners like you. If you enjoyed listening to this episode of Climate Debrief, please like, comment, and subscribe. We read all of your feedback. If you are interested in finding out more about the CO2 Coalition and its mission, visit our website at co2coalition.org. Our host and executive producer is Angela Wheeler. Production by Ethan Audie and Scott Wheeler. Technical production and editing by Joseph von Spakovsky.